Hang on, it is on. Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our panel. This panel is titled Investing in Independent Storytelling, specifically in terms of a multicultural lens. So we have a panel of experts here with me to talk about what it's like to get a film funded, to get a film distributed, made, all the partners, challenges, and opportunities along the way that are unique to multicultural filmmakers. Just to introduce myself, I'm Christine. I'm the general manager of Goldhouse Futures. Goldhouse is the leading Asian Pacific organization working across fields to foster, invest in, and accelerate talent. And I specifically work on emerging talent and independent talent across creative industries, running our accelerator programs, our grant-making programs, in addition to our direct investments. So we have a panel of co-conspirators today, whether personally or through their projects or through their companies. So they're all partners of Goldhouse in some way, shape, or another, so we're really excited to be here. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce our panelists today, and then we're going to go ahead with questions, and then we'll also have some time for questions. So if you have questions in the audience that you want to keep in mind, we'll wrap up with that. But to start us off, all the way on our far left side, we have Abe Bengio. Abe is an agent at WME Independent, where he packages and sells independent films. And he's sold films such as Triangle of Sadness, Joyland, Passages, a lot of award-winning works. And prior to that, he was a manager of film sales at Fifth Season, where he focused on international talent, writers and directors, production companies, financiers, and entertainment venture funds, both in the US and abroad. We also have Nina Yang Bon Jovi. She is a BAFTA-nominated, award-winning film producer who, alongside Forrest Whitaker, founded Significant Productions, where she focuses on multicultural stories with an eye for authenticity, diversity, and inclusion. And her critically acclaimed work includes works like Fruitvale Station, Dope, Songs My Brother Taught Me, Passing, Fancy Dance, and she also serves on the board of the Producers Guild of America, CAPE, and the executive committee of the Academy. So she's not busy whatsoever. We also have Kyle Bowser, who's the Senior Vice President of the NAACP Hollywood Bureau, where he leads their efforts towards equitable opportunity in media and entertainment. And he comes from a very long, illustrious background and experience spanning film, television, music, theater, radio, new media, technology, and he's previously led teams at companies like NBC, Fox, and HBO, just to name a few. And last but not least, we have Carlos Lopez Estrada. He is the filmmaker behind films like Blind Spotting and Summertime, both of which premiered at Sundance in 2018 and 2020, respectively. And his Disney-released film, Raya and the Last Dragon, was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. And as a producer, Carlos is the founder of Anti-Gravity Academy, which is the production company and talent incubator specializing in creating opportunities for emerging talent in film, television, and beyond. And Anti-Gravity's very first produced project, Dee Dee, just premiered this past weekend. It was written and directed by Shane Wang. And it's premiering here in competition this year. So I'm really excited to get started with you all. I think when I was thinking about this panel, so I found out that I was moderating this panel and then I was given the title. And I was thinking about the questions to come up with, and investing in independent storytelling is really interesting because the investment piece is really critical to the definition of what makes it an independent film. And so thinking about what to talk about, I thought we should really start there and start at the top with independent storytelling to begin with. So this is an open question for all of our panelists. Feel free to answer it, but really just wanted to start off with, why is independent storytelling important, perhaps now more than ever? How do you define independent storytelling in independent films? And we'd just love to start there.
I'll start. No, you start. Abe.
I don't know. I think independent storytelling has been around forever. It's going to be around forever, right? And I think, not to quote another great person who's not here on this panel, but Ted Hope once said that artists move faster than business and markets. We have the opportunity to kind of set the table. And I think at the end of last year, we're talking to all the studios, trying to see what they want to do in 2024. And everybody is saying the same thing, which is really exciting. They're saying that they want theatrical. I think they're also saying that potentially the superhero era is coming to an end. And so, so I think, you know, it's up to us, it's up to Sundance, it's up to all of these festivals to kind of set the tone and to figure out what is going to be the next theatrical event, what is going to get people back into the theater. We're starting to see that a lot this year. It's really, really encouraging.
So from my end, when it comes to independent storytelling, this is where the most nuanced voices are launched. And some of the voices that I worked with are changing the paradigm of Hollywood. The Ryan Coogler's, the Boots Rileys, Rebecca Hall, Chloe Zhao. These are filmmakers that people didn't want to bet on, which is wild. And then you see what they're doing today to help change the landscape of what we see on TV, what we see on film. So I think it's quite critical for independent storytelling.
I mean, I've had the good fortune to work on tiny movies that I put together with a group of friends, and also big studio movies with, you know, global releases. And I think there's just something so beautiful about indie filmmaking that allows us as creatives to feel like artists, and that allows us to feel like authors. And not to say that you can't make a big studio movie that still allows you to experience that, but there's something about the spirit of making films that are driven by talent, that are driven by ideas, that consider the creative first and then the industry side of things, that is really freeing. And I think having done a big Disney movie and now sort of like taking a step back into the indie world, I can tell you that there's a freedom that comes with that I don't think I could ever give up, because of course we need to make a living and we need to survive and we need to make money, and it's nice to be a part of Hollywood as a working director, but I think that I never really got to feel as an artist, or at least as I do when I am surrounded by people who really care about nothing but making the most beautiful movie as possible. So I think no matter where life takes me, I'm always going to keep a foot in the independent world. And I hope that all filmmakers do, because it's easy to get distracted by all, you know, career growth, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by all these amazing opportunities. But I think for me, it's been so healthy to be able to just keep calling this home, and then everything else just feels like a little excursion.
Let me say, well, the first thing I want to say is I spoke on Monday this time last year in this same spot, except we were on the other side of this wall. There was a tent that was only covered on 3 sides. And I refused to come back and speak on Monday again unless we were in an enclosed pavilion with heat. So thank you for providing that.
They took that really seriously. I think I'm gonna start.
No, it wasn't Gold House. It wasn't Gold House. Anyway, you used the word nuanced, and I would agree with that. I might have chosen a different word. For me, it's the otherized or marginalized storytellers who have been emerging for some time now, and I think their presence is important because they challenge the status quo. They push society to consider that what we've been taught is normal may be normal, but it's not the only definition of normal, and we can expand that definition to include so many other points of view. So independent storytelling for me is the emergence of that group of storytellers.
I wanted to start with Abe, because you're really someone who's built and created this career by having a really sharp pulse on the industry, what it wants. And I was wondering if you could start us off by sharing what your perspective of the film financing industry for independent movies is like today. What is the landscape? What are some of the macro trends? What are things that you're looking out for? Would love your opinions on this. Would love for you to set the stage for that.
It's a big question. Thank you. I mean, I think the business of independent film financing is very much alive and well. I think there's never going to be a shortage of artists who are making exceptional pieces and investors who are chasing that dream of supporting art in various aspects. I think that comes in many different forms, right? It can come in forms of grants, it can come in forms of hard money, soft money. I think what we're seeing nowadays, though, in the independent space is, you know, a little bit of a change, a little bit of a shift away from, you know, smaller. I think people are trying to go bigger. People are trying to reach a bigger audience. I think people want to entertain. And I think within the independent landscape, we're finding new money constantly, new sources of investment, and that's really exciting. I think we're also seeing that, you know, distribution is really key, and I think bringing in things like pre-sales and having conversations with distributors, knowing what they want, knowing what the needs are, knowing who your audience is as you're writing the script, I think is really important, because from a buying perspective, people are looking at less but better, right? And I think we have to challenge ourselves in the inception of a project to understand kind of, you know, who's going to be our audience or audiences, who's going to be our platform. Is it something that a film is going to be theatrical? Is it going to be streaming? Is it going to be a blend of both? Does it have international value? These are all questions that we really have to ask ourselves, and it's tough, right? Because I think true independence kind of forgets about all that and tries to break through the noise. But I think nowadays we have to challenge ourselves to be prudent.
And to follow up on that, when you're giving filmmakers advice early on and to consider what the distributors might be thinking, generally, do you find yourself, when discussing audience, do you generally find yourself advising larger audiences, broader audiences? What is some of the advice you find yourself giving there?
I think it works either way. You know, I think there can be a very specific audience, but I think you have to understand, how is your film going to break through? How is it going to build word of mouth? You know, I think for a first-time filmmaker, if you're making your first feature, I think my advice is always make it for as little as possible so you don't have to answer any questions to anybody, right? Go as far as you want, be as audacious as you want. Premiere it at a festival, try to shock and awe your audience, because there's a lot being made. There's a lot of movies out there. And the challenge for filmmakers is really breaking through that noise.
Got it. Nina, you're someone who is extremely passionate about cultivating sort of this next generation of producers. This is something that I've heard you talk about on panels a lot. Nina and I collaborate on the Gold Producer Accelerator at Gold House as well. And producers, in the role that they play in filmmaking, and given the landscape of financing today, what are some of those unique skill sets and strengths that you might recommend that they invest in and cultivate?
So I think this is something I always speak about. So many people want to be writer-directors or actors. Not many want to be producers, because it's not the most glamorous job. And as you go through it, you can launch a successful film, and then you go to the red carpet, and nobody cares about the producer. They want you to step to the side, right? And you got to be okay with it. But the rewarding aspect is to see an idea come to fruition and for the audience to see. So when I work with emerging producers, it's like you really have to understand marketplace, what Abe is talking about, who your audience is, but also what story are you telling. But really important is to understand the finance aspects of it. When Abe was saying, make it as little as possible, it's true, because the more money you take, you got to answer to that money. Many filmmakers come to me and say, I need $5 million, and I go, how do you plan to make that money back? And it's silence, because and producers, they're like, I don't know, I just need somebody to give me the money. I'm like, you can't think like that. You have to know, you have to be accountable for the money that you ask for to make the film. So it's like really understanding the art and commerce, that they go hand in hand together. And then you work with your agents and trying to figure out, what is the strategy, what's the formula to not only get your film out there, bought and sold and seen, but also how do you make your investors' money back so they can keep coming back. You don't want to burn your investors out and it becomes unsustainable. So really understanding art and commerce for producers.
And to just double click on that a little bit, in terms of managing the investor relationship as well, I'd love to hear about any specific advice about managing your cap table, managing the different parties that are invested?
Yeah, managing investors is interesting, and I look for investors that do want to invest in new voices. I'm in a space where I work with narratives of color. It's a different space. It's a different lane, and managing those expectations of financiers is pretty critical. They have to be patient and waiting for a sale. They have to watch the marketplace with me to understand that it is harder in the space that I work in. And from Fruitvale Station to Layla today, last year we had Erica Tremblay's film Fancy Dance. It's a totally different market. And for me to manage my film fund partners and say, please be patient with me. We're diligent about the process. We're strategizing every step of the way. And so that's, but as a good producer, constantly are updating their investors, finance partners, because I work with a lot of financiers who's gone to other films and they're like, gosh, the producers don't keep us in the loop. The producers don't update us. So we feel like they took our money and ran. And that's not what we want to do.
Just to jump in on that, there's all kinds of investors, right? A lot of them, this is not their primary business. They're doing this for the fun, for the being patrons of the arts. They're doing it because they want to tell a story. They're doing it also because they probably want to learn how to produce and be producers themselves, oftentimes. So
and to look cool.
To look cool, that too. But to your point, it's like keeping them invested in the process and the creative as much as possible is going to really bear fruit for you, and in the long run.
Yeah, they keep coming back, right? If you're accountable, and even though when things are going right, you're updating them, getting them invested in the process, but they're learning, and I want them to be able to invest in other people's films, not just mine.
And Kyle, in your work at the NAACP, you're responsible for furthering all of their initiatives within the entertainment industry at large. And in terms of balancing that nexus between commercial objectives, equitable representation, would love for you to speak to that balance, sort of what you're seeing in the industry, and specifically as it pertains to your work directly.
I think it's important that we remember financial choices or fiscal policy is really a reflection of a value system, right? And so when we talk about investing in independent storytelling, from a macro scale, we have to look at the ecosystem and what's really going on here. McKinsey a couple of years ago put out that report that spoke about the industry forfeiting $10 billion annually because of its refusal to fully embrace the Black storytelling experience, both from the storyteller perspective and from the vast audiences that crave their work. Just refusing to fully engage with that energy costs the industry $10 billion annually. Now, if any of you have ever dealt with business affairs or any of the other bean counters in the industry, they don't leave money on the table. That's a smoking gun to me. That tells me that at the end of the day, it's not just about money. It certainly is not just about entertainment. What it really is about is perpetuating a value system. And the stories that are greenlight, the stories that are celebrated, are the ones that help to affirm a belief system. So when you ask from my perspective or the perspective of the NAACP, we look at that macro ecosystem and we say, okay, how can we change that paradigm? How can we get the definition of normal to be expanded to include everyone so that you don't have to convince investors to be patient, because it shouldn't require any greater what's the word I'm looking for? It shouldn't be that much more difficult because they're stories of color. That's only because of a value system that we're operating within.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot more research to that effect as well, that like representation and diversity is actually great business. In 2022 in the US, both box office sales and streaming ratings peaked for films that had 31 to 40% diverse casts.
Right.
And then I think it was social media activity peaked at projects that had 41 to 50% equitable cast. So I think it's shown that really in terms of success and representation, those two things are not mutually exclusive by any means. In fact, they're very much overlapped here.
What it means to you is that, unlike everything we've been told, money is not always the bottom line. We need to sustain the paradigm that has been built. And that means otherizing certain kinds of experiences and the storytelling that reflects those experiences.
And speaking of that diverse storytelling, Carlos, you have a film that you've produced here, Dee Dee. I feel everybody's talking about it, much buzzed. We have some of the team in the audience as well. And I just wanted to, in the context of this topic, financing, independent storytelling, this is a broad question, but was hoping that you could take us a little bit through the journey, specifically in the context of Dee Dee. What was that financing journey like? What type of financial instruments or opportunities did you end up leveraging? We'd just love to hear from your own words.
I'm gonna try to answer this. I was a first-time filmmaker not that long ago, and I became aware very quickly of how weird that transition is from being someone who wants to make movies to being someone who is making movies. And unless you have a group of people around you who are like really shepherding you into this new universe, I think you get really lonely and I think you get really confusing. And I experienced it. So I started this company a year ago with the intention of being that support system for people who are in the position that I was in 6 years ago, and just trying to offer tools and more than anything just a presence for first-time filmmakers who are trying to figure out how to get a movie made, because it's nearly impossible to make your first movie. And I think that people who do only do because there's people like Nina who miraculously cross paths, financiers who see something deeper and are willing to take a big chance. Anyway, the company was sort of like founded with that vision, and Dee Dee's our first project. Sean is someone who I've known for a couple of years. We've gone to work together on a couple of projects. He reached out to me about 2 years ago saying, hey, I have this script. I have no idea how to make a movie. Can we talk? And we did. It was a beautiful, beautiful story. Sean had been working doing short form stuff for years and had to prove nothing because he's a talented, magical filmmaker. And what I told him is, I didn't say, look, I have the answers and I let me just do this for you. I said, look, I was asking these same questions a few years ago, and I'd be happy to join you as you explore this. And I feel like I can, just based on my experience, just offer a little bit of insight in terms of how to navigate this. I also feel like we can bring on other team members who can fill in the gaps that I can't. I don't have a lot of experience finding financing, and we brought on Josh Peters, who's one of our 3 producing partners. We brought on Valerie Bush, who has a lot of experience on physical production, and I feel like what we did really well is just look objectively at what we needed and make sure that we brought on people onto our team who could offer their expertise in these areas. So I think that amongst the 3 of us, Valerie sort of like doing the heavy lifting on the production, and Josh really being able to leverage all of his experience in doing what Nina does really well, which is wrangling financiers to come support projects, and myself creatively. I think that we were able to create this really little ecosystem that a year later we were shooting, and 6 months ago we wrapped and we're here. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question at all. That was a really big question. But yeah, the goal with the company moving forward is to be able to do that for other filmmakers who are equally just as passionate and ready to take that step and just need a little community to be able to figure out not on their own. Yeah, was that helpful?
It did. I think in terms of like getting a film made, the key takeaway is what are your expertise? What are areas that you need more expertise in, and building a team around that. I mean, I think that's a lot of the solution to begin with. And Carlos, you are a Sundance veteran. I feel like you're downplaying yourself in your answer right now in saying that there's a lot you don't know, but you do have a really great track record at the festival, and there is a lot going on at the festival. There's brand activations, there's of course the movies, but I think underlying everything is the marketplace, right? And the sales conversations and those discussions that are happening. Can you give us some tips? I mean, I think I'll extend this to the broader panel as well in terms of like how do you do Sundance well? Any advice you have for producers, filmmakers? We'd love to hear from you.
I mean, tips is find yourself someone like Abe who can help you navigate this crazy world of acquisitions. We have an amazing sales team who are helping us navigate these really complicated conversations. You know, we're just a group of Valerie's first movie, Sean's first movie, my first movie producing. So I think we've been really lucky in surrounding ourselves and crossing paths with people who see the value in the movie, who see the talent in Sean and want to support it. Yeah, I think so. That's been on like the more industry side, but I think what's been most important for us in how to do Sundance right is making sure that we're enjoying it, and that Sean's here really because he wants to share his story, and I think everything else is secondary to that. And I had a pretty hard first Sundance experience just because I was really just so anxious and didn't really get to enjoy the festival much. So I made it my personal mission to be there for Sean and say, look, I'm going to do everything I can for you to actually enjoy this. It's incredible to be sharing your first movie with audiences for the first time, and I think that should be the focus of your festival. And we have a great sales team, and they're going to help us look into the future, but as of now, I think that just being here and experiencing film with a community of film lovers is the most important thing. So we've been trying to balance our experience in those two ways.
I like the point you made about, the life of a movie. You write something, that's one life. You make it, that's another life. You edit it, turns into something else. But then what's really interesting is that you take it to Sundance and it transforms when you bring it to audiences. And at that point, also another great tool, great part of the team outside of sales is publicity. And getting a great publicist on board to make sure that narrative is consistent, right? And that narrative spreads like wildfire. And I think it's evident with Didi, we had a great team, and the word of mouth is great.
I mean, I'm with Carlos on just having a great sales team, strategy with publicity, but I've been with WME since Fruitvale and present to Layla, and just working closely with the team of understanding marketplace and how it changes. But I remember we were in 2018 together when you had Blind Spotting, and I had Sorry to Bother You, and it was a tough year. I remember with my team and Boots Riley, and we're in our house pretty much in tears, trying to figure out value. Why is the marketplace not valuing, what we put out that was so different and awesome and revolutionary? And then I know that you guys are also from the Bay Area, and I'm like, I wonder how the Blind Spotting team's doing. How are they feeling? And I remember Boots was like, I'm keeping in touch with them, figuring out what they're doing. And I remember that was that moment where the camaraderie is so important amongst film teams. And I remember we were communicating through different parts of our team saying, please don't settle. And I remember that was something that was the takeaway, like, don't settle. You guys, let's do this together.
I'd actually love to hear a little bit about those conversations that are happening before you get to a festival in preparation for some of those sales conversations. Is it sort of thinking about what the pitch is, crafting it, seeing how it might have adjusted from earlier in the creative process? How are you best preparing? Is there like a hit list of folks that you've built sort of a pipeline of people to speak to? I would love to hear what that prep process looks like.
Yeah, sure. I think it's all of the above, right? It's talking about the talking points, the selling points, the pitch. Do you go deep into the background of the filmmakers and the film you're talking about? Is that necessary, or is it better to pull back? Do you oversell? Do you undersell the pitch, right? If you know you have the goods, I think it's probably best less is more. But making sure that the film and the filmmaker, who's oftentimes a first or second timer, is on every buyer's radar and having those conversations one by one. And then a big part of it is, again, just going back to publicity and making those talking points, those production notes, getting ready to get the film in front of reviewers. A big question that comes up every festival is, do you screen for the press before, or do you screen for the press right there in the room at Sundance? A lot of that has to do with your slot. Do you have a good slot? Is it later in the festival? Is it earlier in the festival? All of those factors kind of come into play because we're all working towards that goal of creating momentum for the film and not having that momentum be stunted by an early slot, a late slot, reviewers being too spread thin, which nowadays is a big challenge that we're up against. They're underpaid and spread thin, and that's a really big part of the process. When you premiere a film at a festival, it's because you need an audience to recognize it, and because you need press to review it, so that you can create a moment for the film to find its sea legs. If you have a perfectly commercial horror film with cast, you may not need a major festival to go and sell it. You might just be able to do that back in LA. So all of these things are just crucial.
I think I'm going to double down, I think, on some of the things I said earlier. One of the things that we really need to be focused on is changing paradigms. I just think that's where we are in our evolution as a society. We might consider bringing the audience into this process on the front end, not only thinking about them as the back end consumer. A dear friend of mine who is deceased now directed a film in the early 70s, and financiers that had made commitments to him reneged. And he went on local radio in New York and talked about the story. And people started calling in and pledging money, and he started receiving $5 checks and $20 checks or $20 bills in the mail, and got enough money assembled for him to shoot most of the film. And then he finally went to a distributor and got the completion funds and finished it. The NFL, what we now call the NFL, started early 1920s. By 1923, one of their founding teams, the Green Bay Packers, any fans here? Well, they were on the brink of bankruptcy. And they decided the best way to save the franchise was to make shares available to the tax-paying residents of the city of Green Bay. And to this very day, technically, that team is owned by 350,000 residents of the city of Green Bay. And the shares only cost $300. Just, 6 to 9 months ago, Paramount talked about offloading BET, and a number of prospective buyers emerged. Tyler Perry, Byron Allen, Diddy, some other folks. And our office wrote an op-ed and posed the question, might Black America own BET? Might there be a way for the people who actually generate the culture that's being monetized on this platform, perhaps they should be card-carrying shareholders of that entity? So these little anecdotal stories I'm telling are in a hope, I'm hoping will get us to think that maybe there's a way for us to bring the consumer into the front end of the process, engage them, get them invested emotionally and monetarily, so that the back end is not so iffy.
I want to triple down on what you just said. Please. Because as you can tell from this panel, it's so hard to get a movie made. And it's so hard, we may be making it sound easy because we're in it, but I can see how someone who's writing their first script hears this conversation and is just like, okay, that's great, but what do I do? And there's so many filmmakers who do not have access to the Ninas of the world and the Aves of the world, and I really do think that we just had really strikes a chord, because as much as we need to support and keep pushing forward our industry, I do think that there need to be alternative ways to get projects off the ground, and the answer is definitely in our communities, because that's really the only way we're going to really diversify the industry. If we cut all these processes that make it impossible for people who are not living in LA and New York and who have some form of connection into the industry, or who know the person who knows the person. So I really do, I would be really excited for this conversation to expand and to just say, there's a lot of crowdsourcing and it exists, but it's still nowhere near allowing filmmakers to fund and produce their movies unless they have this huge machine behind them. And there's a lot of examples of movies that are truly, truly, truly independent, but I feel like in order for our industry to really enter this next stage, we just need to think a lot more creatively in terms of how we're supporting young filmmakers. And what Gold House is doing, there's a lot of organizations that I think are really, really hopefully about to break some ground, but I just really want to celebrate what he just said, and I hope that it resonates with more people, and I hope that people really take it into their own hands. And I would love to see Sundance in 2 or 3 years be a festival with half the films in competition, or over half the films in competition, are films that are truly done for low budgets without the backing of a studio.
One last thing. The other important aspect of that kind of a paradigm shift is I think it helps contribute to media literacy, which is incredibly essential right now. If consumers had more of a vested interest in the stories that are being told, and they would take a more vested interest in what stories they choose to expose themselves to and allow to infiltrate their thinking and their perceptions and their behavior.
Yeah, and I think when folks talk about diversity in entertainment, a lot of the conversation is about representation on screen, but I think in terms of the actual equity structuring and who has a stake in it, I think that is a fundamental part of the conversation as well. And I wanted to ask a tactical question. This is an open question in terms of, say I'm a filmmaker, I have no rich friends, I don't have any rich parents. I'm trying to get something funded, I'm doing it in a scrappy way. I do think that there are organizations, there are foundations, there's grant money to tap into. There's crowdfunding that's become more popular, but what are some of the other vehicles, advice, tactics that you might recommend someone could do today or tomorrow?
Well, when the Coen brothers made their first movie, it's kind of crazy, and I think that strategy hasn't really changed. When they tried to make Blood Simple, they basically went to I think a hospital registry, and they tried to find all the wealthiest doctors in their current area, and then they started calling every single one and telling them that they needed to read this script and that they were going to be excellent filmmakers one day. Nowadays, we have Seed and Spark, and you've got Kickstarter and all these other folks, and that process sometimes can be daunting, because to Nina's earlier point, it's you've got to keep a couple investors happy and informed. Imagine trying to keep hundreds of people informed and happy. That's probably challenging, but I think get scrappy. There's no kind of other way around it. If you're to Carlos earlier's point, if you're not connected to the bigger investors, who, by the way, you're gonna have more questions to answer to them.
I think it's a combination because of who you are. Are you the writer-director, the director, or the producer, right? Because it depends what your role is, but it definitely works hand in hand. You and the director, filmmaker can go out to pitch and potential people. You look at films that's been made that you love that are in the indie space, look at who their executive producers are. They could be great allies for your film because it's maybe there's some commonality. So start researching some of the films you love in independent film and who their executive producers are. They could lean into your film, and that's one way. But also know your role. If you're the producer, start reaching out and to be not to be ashamed of how many investors you bring on, because that's something people are like, I don't want that many investors. It's annoying. Whatever it is. How many investors did we have on Passing? 9. And I had to answer to all 9 of them. But we got the film made, we hit it out of the park, and they're all happy, so they're gonna come back again. And then, so it's okay to have multiple investors on an independent film that you're trying to make.
I wanted to flip the question a little bit because I know we have filmmakers in the audience, but I think we also have film funders, maybe aspiring investors. Could you share some advice for them? Like, what are examples of investors that you really, really like working with? What do they continuously come to the table with? What are some of those traits? And when you're being selective about the folks that you're working with and your financiers, like, what would make you choose one pot of money versus another?
I have experience for both. I have investors who are willing to learn the process, but also willing to understand the challenges of specific films that you choose to dive into. The ones I avoid are investors who do it for pure vanity's sake, because they're like, oh, we really like that actor or actress in your film, and when that person's filming, I'm gonna show up with a tour bus. That I've had that, and I'm okay with it, and I gave them the tour, but you have to pick and choose. And I have investors that I'll never work with again, because even though they're high net worth individuals, they were so obnoxious through the entire process, disrespectful to me and my fellow producers, or disrespectful to our filmmaker. And they'll go, why aren't you inviting us back again? We did so well for that film. And I'm like, I just don't want to have that around art. So.
And I think prioritizing the stories over the package, because we had a lot of investors for Didi who decided not to support us because when we had conversations, we didn't have, A-lister in our cast. I mean, we have Joan Chen, who I think is at the top of the A-list in my book. But they were just like, wait, who's the lead? Oh, it's a kid, and it's a lot of first-time actors. I just don't think this makes sense financially. And I think that's just this misconception that having actors who are in headlines is immediately going to translate into the movie getting sold. There's many examples of movies that are cast incredibly and just end up going nowhere. And there's also incredible examples of movies that are small and have cast of first-timers that end up becoming incredible business decisions. And I think I would just love for investors to understand that what's at the heart of a movie is not really just how you're gonna bill it and who's gonna be on the poster. And I would just really love for that not to be. It was just so sad to hear so many no's purely because of what the package looked like on paper. So yeah, I would just say there's something a lot more profound and beautiful about movies, and I would try to go beyond the surface and try to get excited about it for the reasons that we're making the movies for, and it's not just to see who we can attach.
I think that's where due diligence comes in on both sides, right? I think the investor has to figure out a way how to do due diligence on something unique and special like Didi, where the filmmaker and the story is the selling point, and that's where the return on investment comes from. And I think, agents, advisors, that's where kind of we come in to work with the financier to help them do the due diligence that they need to create comparables, to create scenarios, to create a sales strategy that puts them at ease, so that they can come to the table, right, in a meaningful way. And both ways, we also want to do due diligence on any aspiring investors out here. Where is the money coming from? Is their heart in the right place? Why are they investing in something? Are they assholes? Because, to your point, life's too short.
And I think we have a couple of time for audience questions. Right there on the... Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Some of you know me, and I wanted to follow up on what we were talking about on crowdfunding and that. So, small context, sorry. I run film at a platform called Republic, which has a securities license to allow non-accredited investors to invest into film equity, development, distribution. And in the tech world, there's 3 million users, 2.5 billion raised, and you have founders launching their projects in tech, startup, real estate, and then A16Z and all that come in. For film, I would love your opinions how we can kind of get past that barrier around like Hollywood snobbery. Like if you have a talent name attaching themselves to a project, how it's sensitive to have them ask for money. There's a lot of sensitivity around like an EP who has a following and a talent asking their community for money. Of course, it's an investment, but how can we kind of counter that, that stigma that we have in Hollywood around crowdfunding when it needs it the most of any other industry?
I don't know, you may all have some opinions, but I think that it's gonna take 1 or 2 movies from established directors, established producers to say like, you know what, we're just gonna swallow this, and it may look a little weird at first, but here's the movie and it's wonderful, and we asked our community for help, and like what can you say against that? But I think it's just gonna take 2 examples so you can say, oh, that's the movie that premiered at Sundance, that sold incredibly, and guess what? They crowdfunded. It's been happening. Like, I don't know if you remember Anomalisa, the stop motion movie that Charlie Kaufman directed, but they had, I can't remember if it was Indiegogo or what's the other one called? They had a Kickstarter campaign, and at the end of those credits, there's like a list of 300 names or more of, I don't know if they were executive or associate producers, but they raised a good amount of money just by saying you can come to set one day, your name will be on the credits, you can invest as little as you want. I don't know what the lowest barrier, but people were investing like $50 on it. And there's an example, but I feel like until one of us turns back and says, here's our movie and this is how we did it, there's gonna be that weird stigma, and I really hope that time comes soon. Sorry.
I want to try to further clarify the point I was trying to make earlier. Excuse me. I have a dear friend who is a muralist in New Orleans, incredible painter. And he's commissioned to travel around the country and paint these beautiful murals on exterior walls in various cities. And his technique typically is to go into a community and meet with people in the community to try to ascertain what their needs are, what their interests are. Because he understands that when the mural is done, he's going to get on a plane and go back to New Orleans. They're the ones that have to live with that image in their community. And so he wants to hear from them and understand what their feelings are. And then he also engages with other local artists to help him actually achieve the artwork on the wall. My point is, I wasn't suggesting that we merely take our package to a crowdfunding source and say, hey, do you want to invest in this? I think real equity means you got to start with a conversation with the community. Find out what stories they want to hear or see, and get them engaged in that at that level. I think their support will come more readily if they feel like they have been engaged from the outset, as opposed to, okay, here's the package, here's the story we've already decided we're going to tell, here's who we've got starring in it, blah, blah, blah. The question is, do you want to invest? That's not the proposition I'm proposing.
And I think there's a question in the third row. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to understand packaging more and like having community institutional support like museums and archives and then taking, like, I'm a writer who doesn't necessarily want to be a director because I think the projects are too big for me to be a first-time director. The writing is good. So finding the investments to come in as a, like, first money in or last money in, to then pre-sales for distribution because the marketing or the package is so good to build that. Is that something that's done often? Is that something that you've thought about? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think independent film is really broad. I think we've been talking a lot about Sundance movies, smaller movies, but independent films can be made for $50, $60, $75 million. The definition of an independent film just means that the creative and the package was incubated before going to market in a way that the creatives and the producers were able to maintain control for as long as possible before bringing it to market. So to your point, that means building a package that's robust, that has value and that can be pre-sold, and material that is universal and has value around the globe and not just in the US. So you can work with sales agencies, sales companies, there are a myriad of them, that focus on this sort of element of packaging and that have a very clear system of, and it's not perfect science, but figuring out value based on script, director, producer, actor. Actors are not the only thing that bring value to a package. A producer who's made a film of note in a certain genre can be valued at a certain level if he's making another film in that genre. So we love big independent films. I mean, it's another great business, just one we haven't really touched on yet, but so, thanks for the question.
We'll take just one more right up here in the front.
Yes, I was just curious, back to the question of choosing investors. Have you ever had an experience in which you kicked an investor off because they were an asshole and just gave them their money back and said, I'm done with you, and moved on? And if so, how would you do that?
You're looking at me, right? we actually did. On passing, there was a small group that were vetted and considered high net worth, and somehow they felt really nervous about the film being a period piece, 1920, starring 2 women of color. And they backed out 3 days before principal photography.
Wow.
And I remember getting that call and then shaking, but totally pissed off. So it's not like I kicked them off. I had a feeling there was something wrong with them because they didn't believe in the process, even though they committed a year prior. So 3 days, I remember I was at the camera house, we were testing lenses, and I was like, got this call. My God, you can't start a film without your full financing. Very, very dangerous to do that. And I remember calling WME and just freaking out. And they were like, okay, Nina, we have 3 people that could replace that money, but it's up to you to close them in the next 6 hours. So I went at a time, just pitching my heart out. In 6 hours, we closed one party that came in and replaced them. So.
And it's a great film, by the way.
Just do one more quick one.
Great. Oh, you guys get to ask questions. All right, first of all, I just want to say, sorry to bother you. One of my proudest moments, I was coming back from Cannes. I got to contribute $500 to your screening in LA. Thank you. But I want to know, where can I get access to the data that you talked about? I use Gina Davis Institute a lot for information, because one of the things as a female producer is like educating that we do more with less. So therefore our ROIs, are better, but I also need data to prove this. And on this project that I'm working on, thankfully, we got producing partners that aren't afraid to work with first-timers, Jatari Turner and Jamie Foxx on our next project, and it's about Harlem. So, I think the data that you have is the data that I need, because I'm still doing my part as the producer and not relying on the fact that I have that. Yeah.
So I would direct you to 3 pieces of literature. The McKinsey report that I mentioned earlier, you can just Google it. But I think it was 2 years ago that was released. it's seismic in its analysis. And then if you go to NAACP.org, there are 2 reports that we have published. One is all about the effectiveness of Black executives within the industry and how their presence in the process tends to yield greater results. That's one. And then the other one is our newest report, which is a media guide, essentially. It's called the Guidelines to the Depiction of Black Life in Media. And it has it's chock full of data that you might be interested in.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. I would love to thank our panelists. Thank you. Acura for hosting us today indoors, not in a tent. And thank you all for joining us.